This is Brooke Wanser with the Franklin homepage, and I'm here today with Elizabeth Wanczak, who is a challenger in the Alderman Ward race for Ward 4 it is? Yes, so
That is correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you so much for having me today, first off. And I have always been interested in municipal government. My background is in political science. I graduated from Swanee. That's what brought me to Tennessee. And I have spent the last, 10 years of my professional career in the music industry and have always been interested in running my own business. I owned a business up in Nashville until the April of this year called Right Off the Row, and I'm a paralegal. I still do contract paralegal work, and I've actually done a lot of municipal paralegal work. But we've had just some concerns and ideas in watching Franklin and talking to people and wanting to have an opportunity to get more involved. And I had a really good friend of mine pass away this summer very suddenly, and he was into politics, and we'd always kind of talked about working on a campaign together. And when that happened, it was sort of like, okay, let's get involved, let's do this.
So what sort of skills or expertise do you have that you could bring to this position that you feel is not already there?
Well, I think one of the things that I can bring to the table is that I do have a background in understanding drafting municipal ordinances, the legal side, from the paralegal standpoint of doing that type of work. I understand the vast amount of topics that a municipal government handles, that they work on everything from city sewers to proclamations, and so on and so forth. I am an incredibly dedicated person. I know that when I am on the trail of something and a task, I finish it to completion, and I am I always do everything thoroughly. And I think it would be really good to just have some new ideas on the board. We seem to be operating from a place of not using our leverage. I've noticed that the city seems to be very reactionary whenever issues come up, and I would like to see us be more proactive and taking more steps to try to have plans in place to prevent things from happening in the first place so that we don't have to go back in and fix them later.
So what kind of issues are you referring to?
My biggest concern is the growth. I feel like we are growing unsustainably and without much of a foresight. There are great plans, and I actually do support Envision Franklin that they passed this January, but I feel like we have had a lot of development that we sort of grow first and then try to figure out all the infrastructure later. And it really should be the other way around. We should be making sure that we have the adequate infrastructure and then growing. And so that we can make sure we're providing for the businesses and all the new people that are wanting to move here so that they don't get really frustrated and pick up and leave. I've talked to several Ward 4 residents and a few Ward 4 businesses who are considering relocating because it's just getting so congested and gridlocked. We don't want that. We want people moving here. We want people having businesses here. We want people establishing their lives here. And we need to be making sure that we're doing everything to provide for that.
So I have a list of business-related questions for you since we are in the Chamber of Commerce. So the first one of those is, what is the status on the proposal to replace City Hall, and would that be a priority to you?
Personally, I do not consider it a priority. I know that we have outgrown that building. I know that we need to have adequate facilities. But there are so many other issues right now that are truly affecting the entire city, not just City Hall, that I would like to see us put more focus outside of City Hall itself. I also think that the price tag, I think it's $4 million that they've talked about, maybe more than we need to consider. We're running on a pretty tight budget. The city has some debt. And we've got right now a AAA rating. I want to hold it that way. And I don't want the entire city government, when we're dealing with a lot of big projects right now, completely upended. So I'd like to see us look at potentially some other proposals if elected.
I actually think, because a couple people have mentioned the price tag too, I think it's around 25 million.
Okay,
actually.
there you go.
Yeah. So paid parking spaces recently became a reality on some private property in downtown Franklin. Should the city get in on paid parking or metering?
I think there's going to be a lot of pushback if we suddenly start doing paid parking in the city garages, because one of the advantages we've had is the free parking. People are coming down because we have that kind of adequate service that we provide for them. I think the businesses would be affected. I think a lot less of and there's several independent small businesses on Main Street in Ward 4, and I would hate to see those go away.
Williamson County and Middle Tennessee in general has been a hotbed of economic growth for a number of years. What is it that this area has naturally or policy-wise that kind of gives it a little extra boost and makes it a great place for people to come?
I think the best thing it has for it is that it provides for everything you could ever imagine that you want for business and for home life. We have an amazing school system here. We have a great economy here. Even at the height of the recession, I don't think Franklin ever got too far off for full employment, which is amazing to have sustained. And we're now well below the national unemployment rate, which is awesome. We've got a lot of cultural, opportunities. We're not far from Nashville. I'm a huge Nashville Predators fan. There's opportunities for sports. There's opportunities for to see Broadway shows that come to TPAC or to the Franklin Theater. We get amazing things that come right downtown. We have very good home values. It's still relatively affordable comparatively to a lot of places in the country for what you get for your money. It's safety. We've got, our kids can play in the park and we don't have to worry about something happening to them. It's a beautiful part of the country. I grew up in Texas, so the 4 seasons here is so amazing to me. We're moving into fall and being able to see all the trees change. And to have that and to still be able to raise a family in a great area, people are really lovely, and to see the economic boom that is this area. I mean, we are so fortunate to have so many companies that want to be here, that have relocated here, that there are so many jobs available. You can't drive down the street anymore without someone saying we're hiring, which is amazing. And I think we have a lot of people who would like to join us here. It's just making sure that we have a plan to when they come that we can fit them in.
So going off of what you were saying about jobs, on the topic of quote-unquote corporate welfare, has this area come to depend on corporate incentives too much for relocation or expansion?
I totally understand that there is an important value to offering incentives to corporations to relocate. I think we have to be careful when we are incentivizing only corporations and not other people. And I think some of the pushback I've heard from residents is that, certain corporations, particularly if they're moving into the interior downtown Franklin area, which is in a historical zoning LA district, they are getting all these variances to do what they want, but so-and-so homeowner has to fit everything to a T to put in, say, new windows or something. And making sure that we're not, basically letting Party A have full reign and Party B have to follow the rules. But I do think that we would not have had Nissan if there weren't incentives. We would not have had Mars if there weren't incentives. And we want to promote those type of businesses coming because they hire a ton of people. They bring a lot of their own employees to be here, to be a part of our economy, to be part of our culture, be a part of the fabric that makes us this amazing place to live. And I think we just need to make sure it's a good balance, that we're not over-incentivizing while harming the residents. But then I don't think it's a good policy to stop totally incentivizing either. I think we would see a dramatic drop-off of interest if we suddenly went, we don't want, in any sort of way, we're not going to try to want you to come here and actually try to go out and recruit you to come here.
On the flip side of are we offering too much, I have a question about the Cool Springs area. So much of the infrastructure in Cool Springs was done in conjunction with developers who were required to contribute to support their contribution to traffic volume increasing. How do you feel about this? Is it fair? Should it continue? And are you concerned that this could discourage economic development?
I actually like the fact that Cool Springs was developed with the incentives of the developers to help with the infrastructure, because Cool Springs is a different district, and I don't think we would have the infrastructure that they have established here unless we had the developer help. Whether that was donating land to install more roads, helping us with all just to deal with the density that is here now. I mean, in the time that I've lived in Franklin, Cool Springs is a completely different area than it used to be. Cool Springs used to be a shopping and working district, and now people are actually moving to Cool Springs to live. And so we're not just having the density during the day, we're having the density at all times. And if we have that cooperation with the developers, I think we can update a lot of the infrastructure that may be even lacking. That's not to say that the city should turn all of that over to the responsibilities of the developers. But I don't know that calling it fair, unfair is necessarily the right way to go. I think it's just part of the cost of doing business.
On the topic of traffic, so traffic issues continue to rise. What do you think, with that in mind, what do you think the future is for public transit in Franklin?
I personally am a huge proponent of public transit for Franklin. I think that we, again, just watching how much we have grown. I mean, some of the projections, we're hovering around 71,000 or so. Talking to some of different businesses and different civic organizations, there are some estimates that we double in size from 8 to 5, that we have almost the entire population commuting here to work. That's a lot of cars on the road during the day. And there's a lot of people who are coming either from the south, from Columbia, or even north down from Nashville, who might take advantage of an option for public transit and not have to deal with a car, particularly since the city has done such a good job of putting in walkways. I mean, we're in Meridian, the Meridian development. You can go out basically behind the buildings here, and there's a trail that you can pick up straight into, a bunch of Franklin parks, and even I think it connects to the Brentwood parks. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have a vehicle during the day if you could reliably get back and forth to your house. When they initially proposed the Music City Star system, they called it a star because it was supposed to have 5 points. And my understanding is that they ran out of funding after they did the one leg from Wilson County into downtown. I know it's a CSX line. I know that would be complicated. I know that it's a very active train line from that goes through Franklin and through Williamson County, but it goes straight underneath Union Station, which is now the hotel in downtown Nashville. But you could literally have a ton of people just feeding right into town. And in a selfish way, I think we've got other things going on that would be helpful too, to just get people back and forth. I think we could bringing shops. We could have Franklinites who would not have to worry about where they're going to park for Titans games or Predators games, which would also be wonderful, because we are becoming such a dense metropolitan area that it would be nice if we could navigate easier without having to rely on an individual vehicle.
So you were talking about the trails that run behind where we are in Cool Springs right now. So on the topic of trails, how can we protect green space while upholding private property rights?
I actually have several constituents of the 4th Ward that have called me about this concern because their particular properties are in dioramas for different Greenway Trail proposals. And I am fully supportive of interconnectivity and wanting to have that sort of ability for recreation, for exercise, for encouraging everyone to live a healthier lifestyle. That's a wonderful thing. But we have to balance that with property owners. And particularly, I think we need to observe extreme caution and judgment for any sort of eminent domain or changing the right-of-way type of power that the city holds. It is an incredibly tough sell to tell an individual property owner they're going to lose, let's see, the standard multi-use trail these days is 12 feet, so maybe 15 feet for an easement of their backyard for a multi-use trail, not for a drain that they need to install because we're having sewer issues, not for a road that has totally outgrown its range, but just for a recreation. That is an incredibly hard thing to get people to go, yes, I want to do this. And we need to probably be looking to try to minimize that as much as possible. I am very in support of the city in several areas where they're putting in sidewalks in existing easements that make sense against roads. I think the proposals that they're doing through massive amounts of private property, any way that we can minimize close to property lines would be good. And particularly, any way that we can do to make sure that we're not just haphazardly putting it out because it would seem to be. I think there are ways to try to route around city land, county land, maybe even through some areas that might need to be cleared a little bit more. And I'm not talking about taking out the forest, but just to cut some brush back to have a more natural, to where we're not right up against property. Because I want to make sure that we are only using eminent domain when it really is necessary. Because it is people's private property. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people appreciate here, is a lot of people have lived here a very long time. A lot of people approve of and enjoy our rural landscape. And we don't want to just be taking that without just cause.
My next question is about affordable housing. Do you think affordable housing is an issue in Franklin, and do you think it is something the public has a role to play in?
I do think that affordable housing is an issue in Franklin. I have talked to many residents, and we've got teachers, fire department personnel, police officers, nurses, who can't afford to not only not live in Franklin, but can't afford to live in a reasonable distance of their job. And I would like to see Franklin pursue more private public partnerships for that. Create incentives for developers. I had someone the other day propose, potentially with new developments, see if they might be willing to offer a special rate for public, service officers. So our fire department and our police officer could have, could live in some of the new multi-use buildings, but have it at a rate that they, matches more of what their pay scale is or whatever. I think it's good to have these conversations, but I do think it is an issue. And I have said this before. I believe that if you want to live in Franklin, particularly if you work in Franklin, we should figure out a way to allow you to live in Franklin.
Okay. Sort of along the line of housing, so there are these new urban communities like West Haven springing up and Berry Farms, and then there are the old sort of suburban residential neighborhoods. Which of these do you think will continue to proliferate in the future?
I think we're making a move toward more of the urban community model, solely because it allows for an ability to have housing of all different price points and different, some for rentals, some for ownership. It creates real community central. West Haven is in Ward 4, and they have an amazing identity and an incredible energy that's there because they have restaurants and shopping and the grocery store, and they can walk, and it creates that real neighborhood community experience that you don't just necessarily have in a traditional suburban neighborhood design. I actually live in a more traditional suburban neighborhood design and love it, and my husband and I feel so grateful to live there and plan to be in our house as long as we possibly can. We're excited to raise our daughter, but I totally understand why that model is sort of transitioning out, because there isn't as much that it can offer per se. And when I think we've seen a real turn back towards community and the new urban suburban development model where they've got kind of their own town square, for lack of a better term. I think that's real attractive to a lot of people because they can have their own sense of community.
So with these mixed-use residential communities, do you think there are any downsides to communities like this, or is there anything to be cautious of when building these communities in the future?
I think the only thing that we have to make sure from the municipal side that we are adequately preparing for is the density impact and the infrastructure. I am all for developments that provide entry levels of all different types for homeownership that have, apartments, but also townhomes and also houses, etc. But making sure that, so we know the size of the development and what it's projected to be, making sure that the roads that are built inside of it and around it can support that amount of residents. Making sure that it doesn't totally overwhelm an existing 2-lane road that was just sort of more of a really rural farm road before, making sure we've dealt with that before we build the community. I think the existing residents who have had some pushback would be more okay with that way. And I think the new residents who move in would be happier with that as well. I've talked to several residents who live in that sort of environment, and they didn't realize that certain things were an issue when they moved in, and it's been very sad to see that some of them have chosen to move to different places because that kind of planning wasn't initiated in the beginning.
What kind of issues are you talking about?
Well, the biggest one that I hear consistently, and it is nothing that the Board of Aldermen can specifically do about, but is the schools. There seems to have been not as much understanding for how many new schools were going to be probably needed to educate all the children that are moving in, which is wonderful. I attended yesterday the growth gains and good news talk that Superintendent Dr. Looney gave, and they said they might be building in the next 10 years somewhere between 17 and 21 schools. That's a lot of schools that were not here originally. And as we shift and go, just making sure that do we have enough schools for the area? Do we have are the streets up to level of service for that? Are we going to be completely ruining someone else's quality of life by not, setting it back a certain distance or that sorts of thing? And just making sure, because I think we can all coexist together in all these different types of housing and different types of integration between developers and the city, but we just need to all be talking and making sure that we know what's on the table from the get-go.
So my final question for you is, if you were to be elected alderman, what would your priorities be? And these could already be things that already exist, that are up for discussion, or things that you have totally new ideas on in the realm of business, in terms of housing, creating opportunities for businesses and economic development?
I think the most important thing, and it's what I have been running on, is that I just want to make sure the city has a plan to sustain the growth. And that may be looking at everything that's on the capital planning list and just going, are we sure that, we can really do all this? And if not, bring the developers back in, make sure if there needs to be a road added on or whatever, that we have those conversations. As far as specifically targeted for businesses, I would like to see the city do more with not only going after certain industries like the healthcare industry and the auto industry. We're a huge part of the auto industry, but we are actually starting to be a music industry hub, sort of Nashville South. There are a ton of record labels that have moved down to Franklin, and I don't really ever see the city or the county really talk about the fact that there's a lot of music making going on here, and that's a whole nother way to attract people, I think, from just living in Nashville, is to go, hey, did you know that there's a pretty vibrant music scene in Williamson County, and there's a lot of record labels, and there's a lot of studios, and there's a lot of, and that's my background, and so I noticed that maybe, but it would be good to, and even just as sort of a public-private partnership, I'd like to see us working with some of that to achieve some of the goals that I think the city and the county have. For us to continue to develop the way we are wanting to develop and creating this amazing economic hub that is Franklin.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. This has been Brooke Wanser with the Franklin homepage. We are bringing you Alderman candidate interviews for the 2017 election.